Michael Cunningham, and this is Educide, the podcast. Tonight we have a special guest, Vic and Mike. They are going to talk a little bit to us about the importance of history, the importance of Armenian history, and the importance of what happens when history gets rewritten. Uh, Very interested, and in fact, I'm very proud to say that they have been very instrumental in helping me start off doing some of this work we're doing here. Some of what you're going to hear tonight is going to be very important, and also it'll be used in a statewide Texas teachers professional development for the Armenian genocide that we're doing on March 25th for the April 24th geography of the genocide. This will be the first time in the state of Texas that world geography teachers across the state will be able to use information about Armenia, and so we're going to use clips of tonight's broadcast to talk a little bit about that. So without further ado, I want to introduce both Vic and Mike. Bring them in. Greetings.
Hi. Hey, Mike.
Hey, this is good. Hi, Mike. Mike, and then Vic will be joining us. Mike,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike.
Well, let's see. I grew up in a pretty conservative family. Mother was a violinist, professional classical violinist from Armenia. Dad is a fashion designer, also born and raised in Armenia. I myself am born and raised here, but I lover of history and art, just naturally almost. Not necessarily because there was family conversations about history per se, but just growing up, I was always fascinated with maps, history, everything that happened in the past. It kind of fascinates you as to like how people lived before us, right? Because
Oh yeah.
living in the present, you know. So I mean, it sounds like a really small way to kind of look at it, but once you get older, you kind of start expanding more and more based off of what you know. And without kind of giving away some of the things that we're going to be talking about maybe later on, I over the last 3-4 years, I've really gone deeper to levels that I never really imagined. In terms of history, researching all sorts of things, all the way back to biblical times. I myself am a Christian, proud Christian, and I read the Bible, the good book, and I tie a lot of things in that's going on in the present day, everything in the past, and it takes you on so many different paths, so many different paths. And then beyond that, I'm an artist. I'm a 3D artist. I do a lot of work for film, 3D printing, um, make statues via 3D printing route and for fabrication. And I'll leave that stuff for some other time.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's really good. You might want to tell the people interested. You live out in Glendale or near
Oh
Glendale?
yeah, no, I'm in the Los Angeles area. Well, if anyone's familiar with LA, the Los Feliz or Griffith Park area, which is, I mean, it's literally a hop, skip, and a step away from Glendale.
Okay.
So, yeah,
And,
yeah,
and for people that are not necessarily familiar with Glendale, Glendale's the western suburbs of Yerevan, right?
of Yerevan. Yeah. The unofficial official suburb of Yerevan.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's on the west side. I guess
Yeah.
you'd say that.
I mean, heck, we've got what close to a million Armenians here in California, I believe.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
I think it's
about.
about a million or
Yeah,
so.
and the percentage in Glendale is very high, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, God, I don't know the numbers, but I'd
Well,
say
Los
50 to 60.
Angeles, I believe, is over close to 700,000 Armenians just in Los Angeles.
Yeah, just
Glendale
in
itself,
LA. Yeah.
Glendale is a small city, so you're talking about the city itself can hold maybe 200,000 people, and majority is Armenian. So, but LA, I think, is about 600 or something, and then California itself is they're saying close to a million. Again, I
Wow.
don't know the numbers.
Vic, I guess we caught you out a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Vic.
Well, I was born. My parents, my should say grandparents and grandparents are from Antap. They left during the genocide. They ended up in Syria, and my both my parents' side, same story. They were born in Syria, and then they migrated with their families back to Armenia in the 40s when the whole big migration happened from Syria and Lebanon and so forth. Uh, my brother and I were born there, and in 1988 we moved to Los Angeles. Grew up here, grew up in Hollywood, and then moved to Glendale in the early 2000s. So most of the time I was in the Hollywood Valley area, and then after that, got into. I used to be in music production, and left that career. Got into the cabinet manufacturing business, completely something different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I've been doing that ever since, and got married in 2008, have three beautiful children. I live in Granada Hills, which is in the valley in Los Angeles. And yeah, that's pretty much my life story.
Well, one question I have to ask, kind of off script here, say, with the expense of wood, how's that hurting your cabinetry business?
Um, it came down in the beginning when the whole pandemic thing happened. Obviously, the wood itself, plywood, it went up a lot. Part of it was companies taking advantage of the situation, but it's come down. It's not what it used to be.
Oh, good.
But it's a lot better. But yeah, prices in general in any type of millwork, prices have gone up. I would say, depending what type of materials you're using, from 25 to maybe 40%.
Okay, Mike, I know you're an artist, and last time I heard in your podcast that your statues are going up. How is this impacting your work?
Well, a lot of the materials that I use are manufactured overseas sometimes, depending on job. And then sometimes the pieces that I have to make go to another manufacturer, other manufacturers, and they're getting their materials from other places. So it's kind of like this whole collective, everyone's raising their prices because of mainly material prices. It's not necessarily the labor's gotten more expensive, the process is still the same. Just the materials have gotten a lot more expensive, even on my end personally, not just with what Vic and I are doing with the statues, but just even outside work that I have, right? Away from any special statue work that I have to do. It's unfortunate. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, it's the nature of the beast for right now. Without getting into politics, I have a feeling it'll probably come down soon.
Okay.
Maybe. Might have to weather a little bit of a storm, but
Okay. How did you get interested in the academic study of Armenian history, and why is your show important in helping the diaspora learn more about our homeland?
You want to go first, Vic, or you want me to go first?
Go for it.
As I mentioned earlier,
okay?
What's that?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
A little low, but it's fine.
Okay.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I was always fascinated with history, but I was very fascinated with European and Armenian history. I'm sorry, American history. And over the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years, ever since I got really serious and got into the art industry, the 3D art industry, started opening up my eyes to all of our ancient arts and our ancient characters. And I thought, oh wow, because I went to film school, and I went to I had a lot of colleagues who were big Star Wars nuts and Marvel and DC and all this jazz. And one thing I noticed is I always like going against the grain with a lot of things. And I noticed nobody's doing any prominent historical figures, just even in general world history. Very little. And I thought to myself, why not do something with Armenian history? Because there's nobody that's really doing anything with Armenian history. Kind of bring these characters back to life, in CG format or 3D printed format, And I never got around to doing it until the 44-day war in 2020. And I wanted to do something to raffle off as like just something to raise money with personally, right? And just something small, something I could even just give all the proceeds to. And right when I wanted to launch it, it didn't happen. I made Tigran the Great. I made my version of the statue, and it didn't work out. And then I guess I'll let Vic take it from there. I'll leave that portion as a ...
Well, I mean, as far as my interest goes, as a kid in Armenia, my mom, she was actually a editor of, how should I put it? I don't know what the job title is, but basically, she had to proofread all the books before they were released in Armenia.
Oh, wow.
In Armenian language, so I guess you can call them editor or proofreader. She's always been a lover of our history, arts, writers, just literature in general. And as a kid, even though I was 9 when we came here, she made sure we traveled throughout Armenia and got to see all the great sites, even though those memories are kind of fading. But even when we moved here, she actually brought all the books that were in academia at that time, books that were banned because of Soviet Union, and she made sure that we continued studying here as we were going to school and trying to learn the language. And I got to tell you, when we first moved here, the first 2 years, I couldn't fit in. I wanted to go back every day. I would tell my mom, "Can you please send me back? I want to go back to Armenia." But eventually, obviously you get older, you create friends and school and everything. But yeah, so that was that love of Armenian history has always been kind of instilled in us by my mom, and anything that has to do with books, I have plenty of books over here that I try to get to when I have free time. And historical movies. I'm infatuated with history, like not just Armenian history, like Mike said, like Roman history, Greek history, any historical documentary that could be on TV, Netflix, Amazon. I watch it, and it's just, I've always wondered how people did this stuff, how they lived, and it's just fascinating to me. So Mike, when Mike did the sculpture of Tigran the Great, Mike and I have been friends for a very long time, and we played hockey together. We grew up in the same. We went to the same school.
Same high school.
Yeah, same high school. And I kind of sent him a message, man. I said, "This is awesome. What do you think about if we figure out a way to bring this to life?" And he was like, "Yeah." So he came to my office. We sat down. We started, going back and forth with ideas, how we can present this, what's the best way. And then just one thing led to another, trial and error, and eventually we were able to find the right company to make these out of marble. Because the first versions were like made of resin. It just didn't have that effect that we wanted. But now we're lucky that we work with an amazing company that actually, makes these out of marble, and they're just beautiful. And then when Mike used to, when he would come to the office, we would get sidetracked and talk about history in general. And then I was just like, man, I feel like this should be recorded and be a podcast. And he's like, you got to be kidding me. Like, this is, I don't know. He was kind of shy about it.
I was very
serious, So I kind of almost trapped him into it. I'm the type of person that if I put my mind onto something, I'm going to do it. Like, I don't look back. I don't ask questions. If I want to do something, I'm gonna do it. So I started researching what is the right equipment, how to do it, and the thing is, because my background was sound engineering, I already knew how to do most of the stuff. It was just I had never done a podcast, so I had to kind of go back, and so much equipment has changed over the last 15 years. So I looked at what's the best equipment to use and how to set up the right way, so forth. So I went and ordered everything. Everything came. And then I'm like, "You ready?" He's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yep, we're doing it."
I was shocked.
But we were very like kind of contemplating how to start the first episode. Again, our biggest challenge was, okay, yeah, him and I talk about history, but we also want to put out the correct information, be it factual. And you can go to Wikipedia and do your search, or there's a lot of online encyclopedias and things like that. It just didn't quite have the information we wanted. And then I had heard of Dr. Vahan Setyan, who's a researcher and an author. And somehow, I don't know how it happened that Vahan's sister, I believe, went to school with Mike. Mike, I think you were a year below,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, she was a good friend of mine in high school.
Yeah.
And after, of course.
Yeah. And then, so Mike kind of contacted her and said, "Hey, this is what we're doing. We want to be, if it's possible, you can connect us with your brother." And she did. We talked to him. He's like, "Yeah, I'd love to." The original idea was to have him as a actual host, like a co-host, but he is so busy that it didn't work out. But he helped us launch the first episode, which was, about the Armenian Highlands. We titled it as Resurrection, and he helped us kind of put a perspective of what this podcast was going to be about. And we covered a lot of information first episode. Funny enough, we uploaded the first episode. This was all audio. We were not planning to do video at all. And we uploaded the first episode. I think it was within 2 days or something like that. We had like over 1,000 downloads, and we're like, wow, people are actually interested. And and then from there, it was like, okay, well, the next episode, what do we do? So we started doing research about Urartu. We found great information, and we put that together. And that was the first time where it was Mike and I, without a guest, talking about this history. We were very nervous, but it came out great. We recorded it. It came out great. The second one got great downloads. And then I had heard about Dr. Gevorg Nazarian, who's a historian, and he actually studied here in UCLA, ended up going to back to Armenia, and he got his PhD over there. He does a lot of work. So I reached out to him and I said, this is what we're doing. We need factual information. Would you be able to help us? And he said yes right away. We actually became friends, and all the information that we talk about when there's no guest is provided by him and his colleagues, which is all from the Armenian art archives. So it's all real factual history. We're not just making these things up. So they provide the information. We put a program together, and obviously everybody who listened to us already has figured out. We read this information and then we discuss it. But I think also the best part is because Mike and I have such a great dynamic together. We bounce off of each other. We crack jokes. We make fun of each other. We make fun of ourselves. And it's just been fun, and we love it.
Oh yeah, so you can really tell that you really enjoy each other, and you enjoy history as well. So that's what makes it dynamic, I think. I've probably listened to several seasons of y'all by now, and I don't always get them live, but I do listen to them the next day. So I really do enjoy those. I have another question, kind of similar. What are the role of the parents in trying to help their students study for Armenian studies or history? How important is it in your family?
When I was a kid going to private Armenian school before I switched to the American public school system, it was pretty important because obviously your grades matter, right? That's number one thing. Your parents want you to have good grades. But looking back on it now, the stressing of Armenian history wasn't at the top of the history that, let's say, specifically my parents would discuss or whatever the case was. My mom, more so than my dad, has been a lover of history, always. And she would always talk about it with her friends. You know, growing up, you hear about it and whatnot. Now, I don't know if that was just kind of secondhand influence that just kind of got me into understanding more about world history. But my mom knows it fairly well. And I think it's extremely important for there to be discussions. Perhaps I'm not a parent yet, so I can't really speak for myself, but just my own experience with my parents, with my mom specifically, is if there's some sort of knowledge passed along to you, it has to be regurgitated somehow, right? It has to be taken in, especially when a lot of the general historic conversations that happen tend to be kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Big events in historical timelines, and they're fascinating events. So they're piques your curiosity, right? So you start thinking about this. Oh, what happened? And growing up during my time, we'd just gotten the internet age, about 98, 99. I remember I had a computer and I was like, oh, let me go in and start looking at some cool things and whatnot. And then, the advent of YouTube going into the early 2000s and whatnot, that really helped. But obviously your sources change into more reliable sources, of course, as you move along. But I think family is very important in understanding history, because it kind of plays a very, very big secondhand influence, which then you can turn into your primary source eventually.
Vic, the same question to you. What do you see with your children, and how is it important to teach them history and Armenian language?
Well, it's very important. Just like how my mom, instilled that love of our country and our history in us, I try to do the same thing. And um, I'm lucky enough to be able to send my kids to Armenian private school. They go to AGBU, which you're part of the AGBU program as well. And starting from, I believe, second grade, they already start teaching Armenian history. But the obviously kids at that age, they teach them the basics of maybe some bullet points, things like that, nothing. But I with me doing this now, my kids have shown a lot more interest, and they watch the show, they listen to it, and they'll ask questions. Oh, I didn't know this happened. I mean, I remember last year when my oldest was going through learning about Vartan Mamikonian and the Vahanans war, and obviously they don't go into the details of the the awful parts of it, but why why he died and how important it was what he did and things like that. And we had just started covering that period, and she was listening. She's like, "Oh my God, I know about this stuff." But then, we talked about things in detail. She was like, "Wow, I didn't know this happened." And for me, I hope Armenian schools can hopefully, and I don't know if this happens when they're older, but I think they need to know the details, because we can't just paint this nice picture about our history. And this is with any country, any empires. There's the ugly side of history, and I think it's so important for kids to know what really happened, besides the fact that, for example, Vartan died, and that's why we continue to practice Christianity. Yeah, that's great, but what about everything else that came along? What about the 30 years of the Vahanans War, which, because if it wasn't for Vahan Mamikonian, Vartan started the movement, but Vahan finished it pretty much, right? Mm-hmm. So these are the things that need to be taught. And why it's important is because I believe, and as a grown man in my 40s now, I'm realizing that there's so much about our history that I didn't know that helps me make better decisions about my culture, about how I feel about what's happening in Armenia, um, politics, things like that, because I'm more knowledgeable and I understand what our ancestors did and why they did it. And some of them backstab each other, which we're seeing that happen currently. Um, and sometimes you see the
Yeah.
history repeating itself. So it's very important to know what happened in the past, why it happened like that, and what were the results of those actions. So now, knowing that as an Armenian, when you see something happening with the current situation, you're like, hey, you know what? We did this about 1,000 years ago or about 400 years
Oh, yeah.
ago. Maybe we shouldn't do this again. Maybe we should try a different way. Uh, and that's what's lacking from our education system in Armenia and here. They need to know what really happened in order to understand how to move forward.
Right. You agree it's more than just the date. It's the who, what, why, where, and how that's important. With that in mind, I know you guys are working on a project. Could you tell us a little bit about your animated project?
Yeah, it's we've mentioned this in the beginning when we started. We our goal was to branch out and do different historical projects that involve animation, even possibly live action. But obviously, everything costs money, and it's very expensive. So we've been lucky enough to have met some amazing people while we've been on this journey. We met a gentleman who we helped him. We actually donated funds to help him start a animation school in Gyumri in Armenia. It's just called Popok Animation. His name's Alvan, great guy. And he actually ended up opening up two schools where he has kids from age of, I believe, 16 all the way up to, in their
I think like 28,
Wow.
29, something like that.
to learn animation. And the school officially opened, and he actually has some kids who were in the war, veterans that are learning animation now so they can have decent jobs. So anyways, a long story short, we came up with the idea of doing a short series, like a documentary that explains of what happened through our kingdom. So we're going to go ahead and start with Tigran the Great, and then from there we're going to go on to different types of other kings and queens, so forth. And it's going to be our goal is for it to be 10 minutes. We don't want it to be too long, but it just depends on production how long it takes. But the animation is going to be called The Forgotten Thrones. Yeah, so we're working on episode 1 now. The script is ready. We're working on the voiceover parts and things like that, but it's going to be very I shouldn't compare it to Game of Thrones, but it's going to have very 3D like animation with maps and moving objects and the narration talking about what took place, all the what Tigran did and all that fun stuff. So, but we're hoping in about a month or two we'll have the first episode.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely amazing, and I know AGBU or somebody would be able to utilize that in their Armenian schools as well.
Yeah, and we want it to be kids friendly in order for it to be they can show it in class,
Right.
history class. So it's like I said, it's like an educational documentary about our kingdoms, and they can show it to the kids, and hopefully it will help them spark interest to learn more.
Okay, what is the most interesting fact that you have learned so far? We'll start with you, Vic, and then Mike. In the last 3 seasons, what's the most interesting thing? One thing.
Wow. Interesting fact that I've learned about history in general, our history. Yeah. A lot of backstabbing.
Okay. Yeah. And it's really funny. It's mostly in the same family, too.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that really it hurts in a way. We've seen a lot of internal turmoil, but in all jokes aside, I think the biggest thing I learned that our history was shaped by influences from outside sources.
And go along with that, Vic. I also think Armenia shaped a lot of other people's a lot more than I ever knew. Because when you take a look at Armenia being the middle between Persia and Rome for so many years, and Armenia on the Silk Road, and Armenia with Assyria before and Iraq too, and you go to different areas, Armenia was kind of the center of the world.
Of course. But what I mean by influence is a lot of the decisions were made by bribes, influences from, like I said, other empires, not for the benefit of Armenia, for the benefit of personal gain, which had really bad outcomes. And we saw an entire period of an Armenian kingdom disappearing, then the Bagratunis bringing it back, and then, as we're going to cover, then we lose another 400 years or so before we actually have our first republic, right? So, and that's what I mean is personal greed, personal, that thirst for power, influenced with outside forces, has really hurt our history. Okay. I think we could have been a greater empire, kingdom, and eventually a republic if these things hadn't taken place.
Okay, very good. Mike, how about you?
The fact that Mesopotamia is just an umbrella term, and that the almost entire northern part of Mesopotamia was basically Armenians. Mm-hmm. But it's never mentioned in the history books that way. Anytime, I mean, I don't know about now. I don't know if they're teaching the same thing in high schools nowadays or whatnot, but as far as I can remember, the cradle of civilization, the land between two rivers, the Fertile Crescent. You look at the different types of peoples that occupied that area. When you start really diving further back in the history and understanding who was there and what portions of it they occupied, who cultivated what parts of those lands. If you know the geography of the area, the northern parts of Mesopotamia were mountainous. They used to have a lot more blossom, a lot more rich soil. Who inhabited those areas? Armenians did, or our predecessors of Armenians, right? And they more or less started the cultivation of that entire area, which spread throughout the entire region. But that's never talked about. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but Mesopotamia is like an umbrella term. And what I usually liken it to is how, let's say we go 1,000 years or 2,000 years into the future from now, and you have the United States of America. Now, what was the United States of America? We have people from all over the place living here, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying there's no true American, but you have to look at it in a way where the land was occupied by many, many, many different cultures. Now, we can go on and on about that too, but point is, Mesopotamia was occupied by many different cultures: Sumerians, Phoenicians, Palestinians, Armenians, so on and so forth. And it's never talked about. It's never talked about anywhere outside of, let's say, our discussions or other people who know about this. And it's not a big secret. It really isn't.
No, and you take a look at a bunch of different people, and Armenia takes over most of Levant as well. So there you go. I mean, you take either the northern part, the northwestern part, or maybe even the central part of what we call Mesopotamia at one time would have Armenians.
Yeah, and to conclude, that was I think that's the biggest thing I've taken away so far, where it was I didn't know that either, to be honest with you. Up until we started doing this research and getting into the podcast, I really didn't. And that's where I formed that idea, right? Was learning about this. Mm-hmm. And then understanding further proof as we moved forward. It's beyond convincing. So that to me is my biggest shock, to be honest
I
with
think for us, both of us, it was like when we were, when we were fed all this information in such a short amount of time. I think there was also some kind of a little bit of a shock to us. We're like,
you. Yeah.
how do we not know about this stuff? This is
Oh, yeah.
amazing.
Well,
So
that, that goes to, the idea of this Educide is that it's purposeful that we don't have this, especially when you take a look at Rome or you take a look at Persian history or whatever. They never write much about the Armenians, on purpose. Okay, going to the next question. What are the 5 biggest challenges facing you guys personally by putting on these podcasts, and how have you been able to help your listeners? We'll start with you this time, Mike, and then we'll go to Vic.
Well, first thing I want to say is me and Vic discussed this at the very beginning. No politics. We can talk about past politics because that's not going to make anyone angry. Right? It's not. Unless someone has some opinions about World War I or World War II, which is in more recent history, right? But in terms of our ancient history and talking about that specifically, we can only speculate. Right. So that really doesn't upset anybody. You're not going to be stepping on. Now, you can be stepping on some toes with certain historians, let's not get into the names, who might be, let's call them agents of other states. Okay? But I'd say we've done a good job with that, but the biggest challenge is, I think, time for both of us. I could speak safely for both of us. Time with both of our careers and our, what we do. And Vic has his own business, and he's got a family. I think time has been the hardest part, but when you're passionate about something, nothing gets in the way. I mean, it really doesn't. Nothing a cup of coffee at 9 o'clock can't fix.
Okay, Mike, how much time do you spend a week
on research?
Research and doing the podcast too.
Well, podcast, usually, depending on the guest, will go anywhere from an hour and 30 minutes to about sometimes 3.5, 4, depending on the guest.
Well, if I can jump in, as far as so when we have a guest, it's a little bit easier because we can do a really quick research about the guest, or if it's, let's say we're going to talk about a book they've written or something like that, and it's a little bit easier to form questions to talk about the topic, right? We ask between 10 to 15 questions, and that usually gives you about a 2-hour show, or maybe a little bit longer.
Well, it turns into a conversation.
Yeah, it's a conversation. Yeah, they're topic questions. They're not specific, like anything. It's more about to start a conversation. So if we ask a question, that topic question might last 10 minutes or 15-minute conversation. But when we're doing the one-on-one episodes, which we're just reading about a certain subject and then discussing it, we usually put together the program. We already have the content for, usually we have another 5 episodes. We have the content already. It's a matter of putting it together, right? So we take the content, we read it. What I do is I'll put the kind of like call it a script together, and then we'll have a Zoom call and we'll both read it. We share it. We both read it, and we'll have a Zoom call and be like, okay, well, we're going to read this part, and then let's talk about these bullet points that I think might be very interesting. So we'll make notes of, okay, let's say I'm going to read the first paragraph. Okay, what is important about this paragraph? What should we, emphasize on? And then, but we don't script it. It's more like at that point, we know what we're going to be talking about, but it's just him and I, our opinions, and from there. So that's typically done Tuesday or Wednesday. And then Thursday nights we record, or we do it live, depending. Sometimes we do live, sometimes we record. If we record, we'll air it the next day. But typically we start on a Monday and we're ready to go on a Thursday. And sometimes it's exhausting because then you have Friday, then the weekend, and then you're like, oh my God, we got to do it again. So it's just like one after another. So it can get a little bit exhausting sometimes, but and we do take breaks. We'll take a week off or something because sometimes our schedules are so busy that we can't. And I'll come and be like, hey, we're gonna skip this week. We're gonna record or go live next week. But we've been pretty consistent. And the reason we did seasons instead of just doing episode numbers is because it gives us time to take a break, get all the information. Because sometimes they'll send us so much, content, and you're like, whoa, like we need to put this together. It takes time. So we typically try to keep every season between 25 to 30 episodes, and then we'll take a break for a couple of months and then come back with the next season. So we're getting at the tail end of our season 3. We're doing episode 20 tomorrow with Georg Nazarian, who's, by the way, here in the States, in California. And then we'll probably go up to about 25, 26 episodes or so. We'll see. And then at that time, we'll be going into towards May. So we'll take a couple of months off. I know we have family vacations coming up and stuff. So once we come back from that, we'll start season 4.
Okay. What one thing have you learned that you are more positive about than you were at the very beginning when you first started? What's the one thing that you think you've grown the most? We'll start with you first, Vic, and then we'll go to Mike.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was listening to you speaking, and I remember you said at the beginning it was just a audio podcast. Okay, now you've gone to you're going to animated, you're going to all this other stuff. What is the one thing that you think you've grown the most, or what you're most proud of, or what do you think you've changed the most on since the first episode to the episode 20 of season 3?
Well, I think getting used to the camera was, difficult. Nerves. We're not nervous anymore. We used to be really nervous because, you're live, or even when you're recording, you don't want to make mistakes. We've gotten better at our, I think, reading part of it. That was pretty difficult because a lot of the information they give us, there's a lot of heavy words in there where an average person doesn't use on a daily basis, So,
I remember some banter going between both of you over some words, and you were saying about pronunciations and teasing with each other. Okay.
Yeah. We've made a lot of mistakes.
No, that wasn't a mistake. I thought that was actually good.
No, the funny thing is when we used to just record for the audio, obviously there was a lot of editing because you would be reading and then you come across these words where just like, you're like, what? and the thing is, if you're speaking Armenian, it's a little bit easier, right? But the problem is you have to say it in a way where a non-Armenian listener can understand it. So when you write it in English, there isn't the letters that you can pronounce it the right way. So you try to make it you morph it into this English version of it where it sounds funny, and sometimes you stumble on it. So we've gotten better at that. I think our confidence has gone up. We feel more confident talking about this stuff because, again, don't forget, we're just two guys who had no idea about our own history. Yeah, we knew our history, but nothing to this level. And I think also when people come to us and they'll ask us questions, we're confident to give them answers because we've covered these subjects. I think that's the biggest thing, because we would, if somebody came and asked us something about a certain subject we're talking about, we can answer it. You would be like, okay, so what are we doing here? So I don't know, Mike, you want to add something?
No, I mean, you nailed it with a few of the things. We've gotten a lot more confident in the way we present.
Yeah. Presentation, that's another thing. Presentation is the key. We've worked on
presenting it. We've gotten a lot of things tidied up from God. I remember from the beginning. It wasn't like it was a mess, but it was the format in which we would present things maybe have a way better flow now than they did back then, right? And that's probably the main factor here is the way me and Vic bounce things off of one another. It just seems like it turns into a seamless, smooth transition from one thing to the other, where
It's natural.
whereas maybe before, yeah, whereas maybe before it was. I mean, thankfully we were on audio only because it was quite choppy, and thanks to Vic's editing, we got some things hammered out. But I think over time, I think the timing of when we started doing live or YouTube videos was perfect because at this point we'd gotten really accustomed with, you know, it was good practice. That first what was it, the first season, and then a little bit into season 2, right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
We did
so it was
live. End of season 1. That's when we kind of introduced.
Just about
YouTube live. And I think the key thing that we've gotten better is presentation on the video end of it. For me, I'm multitasking because I'm producing a show while we're having conversations with our guests. I'm sure when you were a guest on our show, you noticed that I'm bringing graphics on, taking things off.
Oh yeah.
So it's very important to me how we present our show. Because production value is everything. Because when someone's watching you, you can't just have it to be loosey-goosey all over the place. You need to have a nice presentation, even though it's a conversation. When we bring in slides, when we bring in information, titles, who the guest is, interacting with the live audience while they're chatting. So we've gotten a lot better at that, I would say.
One more thing I'd like to add to that is when you watch a movie, a show, or whatever the case is, there's always like a flow to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or else you kind of feel discombobulated when the subject matter starts getting bounced around and too out of whack. So I think we've definitely gotten better at keeping that flow where the audience and also ourselves, most importantly, we've kind of flowed through things seamlessly all the way to the end, and then setting up for the next episode and the next episode and so on and so forth. So it's almost like I don't want to liken it to it, but it's almost like somebody watching a well put together movie. At least that's our goal. That's our aim.
Okay. Thank you very much on that one. Now, why do you think our current system has not always changed in stopping our current status quo from coming to understand history, especially when you take a look at the Locking Corridor or what's happening with Armenia currently?
Mike, you want to take this one?
This is a tough one. I'd say in terms of the historical narrative and it being brought out to the rest of the world, there are controlling forces. And I'm not talking about any conspiracy theories, nothing like this. You have controlling forces in terms of who's lobbying for what, who's putting out the books, who's, trying to put the information out properly in terms of pushing it forward financially. I mean, who's printing these books? Why isn't this portion of the world's history being brought forth, and for more people to understand further what's going on in a particular region in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's more or less left up to us or the public for us to do our own research, I guess. But there's specific parts of the world that are just kind of in your face, just like regular history books. Like me and Vic have mentioned this a bunch of times, where Hellenistic and Roman history are always in your face. Always in your face. But I think if there was more of our history, which is really important, I mean, our Armenian history is very important to the rest of the world. If it was more presented in the past, I think more people would definitely understand a lot more of what's going on in that part of the world right now, because it's such a integral part of world history because of the
I think we just took over the show.
Oh yeah, it's fun. Welcome to our podcast.
Yeah, welcome.
Where I think it's the Silk Road. It's the Silk Road. People need to know what was happening with the Silk Road. Why was it so important? It's such a big part of world history, and we were sitting smack dab in the middle of it.
Yeah. So Well, I don't know where. I think Mike might have gotten disconnected. I'm not sure where we go with this, but if you want me to add, I mean, I don't know what else to add. You kind of hit the, you know,
Well,
target with.
I mean, it's but why, think about why people haven't been able to. I mean, a lot of people ask you, a lot of people ask me about what's going on in Armenia. Why? Because we obviously have some sort of source of information, right? Not necessarily about the political stature of it, but
Yeah.
that's the whole point of what we're doing, right? Is providing information, even from the past, which brings people to what's going on today.
I mean, this is we discuss about this all the time. Like you said, it's about bringing the right information.
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay. Now, I was listening very intently to what you're talking about when, especially talking about powers to be. Do you think that some of this stuff is because we do not know things or are able to be manipulated, or do you think if we had a better history education that we could be able to see these things happening?
I think I think that they put I think they put certain types of information for the masses to see. But it's really important that to understand that the information is out there. All sorts of information is out there. Real history is out there for anyone to find for any portion of the world.
Oh yeah.
Right? It really is. But it's a matter of understanding where they kind of veered the masses off from, and it starts from schools, because a lot of those textbooks, I could speak from experience from private school and public school system, there was no difference. It was what you were taught was this.
Well, Mike, I think
right, nothing else.
The biggest
it was this linear. And I usually compare it to like a video game. Remember those old Nintendo games? Everything went left to right or right to left. It was just this linear movement of everything.
You like old Pong.
Yeah, exactly. It was very linear. That's it. Nothing else outside. And that's kind of what we talk about with Armenian history specifically, is the way I was taught Armenian history in Armenian private school was very linear. It was only about Armenia. It was as if nothing else existed outside of the world. So the reason I'm mentioning this is what's done in different portions of the world, and especially, I'm not trying to take it into this topic, but with mainstream narratives, it's the same thing, especially in film. It's always Roman, Greek, nothing else. And in some time periods here and there, they tell their stories, which then puts a seed into people's minds into going and researching, not necessarily looking in all the right places. Some people might stumble into the right places, but not for the most part, to be honest with you, at least in my experience. And I can also, I'm not going to be hypocritical about it, because I was also at fault with this. I would watch let's take for instance Gladiator. Watch Gladiator years ago, and you're like, oh, let me go on to Google and Google this person's name, and then you stumble into like ancient Roman history, and that's it. You just see what you see, what they present to you, and that's it. So powers that be, it's the money, it's the funding. These are big budget movies, big textbook companies and things like that just kind of keep the narrative on course. But I think a lot of people over the last few years are starting to figure this out and looking for other sources of information.
I think the biggest problem when it comes to our Armenian history is the fact that there's nothing that has been written in Armenian, because there's a lot of historical books, amazing stuff written about our history, true factual stuff that has not been translated into English. That has been the biggest problem with Armenia and Armenians, is that we have this tendency to keep all this information within ourselves. We talk about it in Armenian, we write about it in Armenian. Well, how is the world going to know about it when the universal language is English? And now they're starting to see that. If you look at the, let's call them the outside sources, when they are falsifying history, they're not doing it in their language, they're doing it in English.
Oh
They're
yeah.
going after the academy, they're going after academia in English, trying to put this information in there. Why? Because that's what most universities, especially the prominent universities and colleges, everything is in English, right? Armenians don't do that. So you're starting to see that change, and a lot of the younger historians or people in academia in Armenia are starting to get these books translated so the world can know about it. Um, so I think that's the biggest problem I see is why they don't know about our history. It's because they can't read in our language, and this is what needs to change. If those books were translated and published, people would read.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion.
Especially with so many Armenians abroad, and maybe some have assimilated.
Forget Armenians, non-Armenians. This isn't about Armenians reading it in English. This is about non-Armenians.
Right.
Just like how somebody goes and picks up a book about some, the Hittites or anything like that, right? It's written in English because they're like, hey, I want to learn about this culture. It's in English. Well, if you want to learn about Armenian true history, the everything about it, not like I said, not like the bullet points of Armenian history. There's nothing translated, and that's the biggest problem.
Okay. Now, when you think about research into history, and this show's theme here is on Educide. And when I was on your show, I told you a little bit about Educide, where Educide's the genocide of education. What do you think are some of the important things that people do not know about Armenian history, and why do you think we do not know it? It's kind of been asked a little bit before, but I wanted to get more in depth about these powers to be controlling the narratives and stuff like this, because if you take a look at what Joe Biden is doing or our Congress is doing today, I'll step into politics here real quick. It's not much different than what Wilson did, or not much different than Harding did when it came to the genocide issues of 15 to 23. And now in 2023, we're facing another type of genocide, and we're still sitting on the sideline. What can you do to help out?
Well, I mean, again, this kind of goes back to the same thing. What can we do to, okay, key points of what they don't know about our history? A lot. They don't know about our the great kingdoms that we've had, the great kings, specific kings who played a big role in what shaped our history. We mentioned this, I think it was last episode when we had Elena on, and we're talking about Queen Khosrovanush. And funny enough, the day before that, or no, the week before that, we were at an event, and people were asking, "So who's your next episode? Who are you guys going to cover?" And we're like, "Queen Khosrovanush." They're like, "Who? What?" And I can make so many, other points as to certain king names and things like people don't know about because it's not talked about. But again, the reason people don't know about it because there's no information in English. So the key is if we get these books translated or rewritten so it's easier to digest, I think by bringing those into public education, private education, then you can implement these in history classes and things like that. There's Armenian studies now in major universities, but even those studies, I believe, aren't fully going into the details of these certain, you're talking about thousands and thousands of years of information, but at least, let's say if they're talking about Tigran the Great, well, all they know is Tigran Great had this amazing empire that was sea to sea and this and that, right? But nobody really knows the details of what really happened, the trials that this man went through, the turmoils, the heartache, having to kill his own son because of betrayal, his wife being involved in the assassination attempts, basically putting together a coup, like, you know, all this. There's so much stuff that we always joke about. We're like, I think Game of Thrones borrowed all this information from our history, because when we talk about this stuff, we're like, we've seen this movie before, like, you know.
yeah.
So again, I think that is the biggest thing. As soon as we start bringing this information to the forefront in English, it could be podcast, movie, documentary, books. I think that's what's going to help for the world to really know why Armenian history is so important and how much we've given to civilization. We formed civilization, and people don't know that.
Mike, I'm gonna touch on something you mentioned in your question with what's kind of going on in the modern day, even in this country, right? And we've seen this happen in certain other cultures as well, especially in recent times, is the toppling of statues, the toppling of a lot of historical relics. And I'm not discriminating here by saying that a lot of the younger generation are the ones causing this, right? Why? Question is because they're being told something and programmed into without understanding what was happening in the past, really happening in the past. So now when this happens, people just get angry for no reason because they've been told something without respecting what the past was, without understanding fully what the past was, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that a lot of in this country. Now, it hasn't really reached that point yet with Armenian history, but it's being suppressed by a greater power. And I'm just recently learning that it's not really being taught the way we're talking about it, even in Armenia.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm just learning about this, so I can't really speak like I'm a professional about that. I'm still going to learn more, but it's a little baffling to me that a lot of the younger generation doesn't know from Armenia, doesn't even know the history the way Vic and I have been talking about it, and that we've been so blessed to have certain individuals helping us with this real information. And if you don't arm yourself with that kind of information and put that information out there for people, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a bunch of other influential individuals, let's call them the powers that be or however, and they're going to get a lot of the younger folk confused, out of place, not understanding anything about their history and where they come from, and have absolutely zero respect for it. And I think it all starts from a grassroots movement. So that's kind of what Vic and I are really doing here. Is a small sample size of what's kind of going on in a big part of the world today. You know?
Oh yeah. I think you really struck a real responsive chord there, because your podcasts are so dynamic that they can be teaching tools, and then that would get the person interested, and then they would find out more information. You know, so I wouldn't sell yourself short, because you are actually doing a great service to not only just Armenians, but for anybody that likes history, because there's so much. When we study the Middle East, all you study about, you'll study Cyrus the Great, you'll study a little bit about Egypt, and then all of a sudden you don't study anything else.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, I wanted to ask this question here. Excuse me, sir. Why do you think your research on each show has influenced how you think about politics in the future of what's going to happen? How's the past going to influence the future?
It's a good question.
Well, I mean, again, it's almost like history repeating itself. Kind of learning the politics of what took place during these different periods of our history. You kind of see the diplomatic moves that were made, some of the territories given up, why. So what it does is it makes you kind of understand what should be done, and you start now currently with what's happening. You start forming opinions because listen, um, I don't think any of us can just get up and run a country. There's so much involved. You're dealing with these high power countries and things like that. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. But I also believe our current government themselves, our leaders in Armenia, that is, uh, aren't educated on our history. Because if they were, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing right now. And that's my opinion. Some people might agree, some people might disagree. Um, uh, what I've learned is that we need to stop depending on Big Brother to help us. Is it the West? Is it the East? Doesn't matter. Armenians are builders. Armenians are creative people. We've done so much. Going back to the birth of civilization, the cradle of civilization, it was us. It was our culture that did all this stuff. That from agriculture to animal domestication and all this stuff, right? So being these type of people, we need to stop relying on outside sources to come and help us. Yes, you can have diplomatic ties, but we need to start doing things within Armenia for Armenia. And when you do that, you become a powerful country, powerful, having a powerful economy. Then you can start making deals with other countries.
Right.
Well, we have this. You want this, then we need to have this agreement. Things like that. But we haven't done that, and we've put all our eggs in one basket for 30 years. Now you have a guy who's, I don't think he has any idea what he's doing. I personally think he's a pathological liar. Um, and we are in a position where our army is pretty much dismantled in a way. We've been lied for 30 years of what our army was, and our army, pretty much from what I'm hearing from sources, doesn't even exist. And it's sad because those young men who are protecting our border don't have the backing that we thought we did, as far as military weapons and things like that. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into it, but that's what I've learned is just,
Vic, you mentioned something earlier that I would like to interject now. Haven't you seen the same parts in history when Armenia depended on other countries? We were a lot stronger when we were just dependent on ourselves.
Yep. And it all comes from our leaders. If you look at history, there were so many situations where you had these naharas that we call them, which were the leaders, right, at that time of different fractions and things like that. They all had, even though they were, think of them as governors. If we had states, they're governors, right? Yes, they all controlled these areas. They were the leaders, but it was always about one Armenia, unified Armenia. But then there was also outside sources coming in and brainwashing one of them, who ends up backstabbing the other one. Then you have this internal conflict. You have brothers fighting brothers. You have kings, trying to. We're going through the whole Bagratuni period. We're almost done with it, where you had, one brother trying to be king where it wasn't his turn, plotting an assassination to get rid of the brother so he can be king, and these titles of King of Kings, which were titles given by other kings or emperors or whatever, and they were kind of like, I always say, they were like intoxicated by this title of being the King of Kings and made the wrong decisions. And you see a lot of that happening now, I think. So again, history repeats itself, and for some reason we haven't learned from it, or at least our leaders over there haven't learned from it, and I think that's because they don't know their own history.
Okay, Mike, do you have something there?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing over and over again, right? Pun intended, because history always repeats itself, and the more and more you start diving into history and understanding history, again, this is not limited to just Armenian history. You start to see the patterns that over a certain number of decades or centuries, the same thing, the same playbook almost keeps playing itself out. And when you arm yourself with that kind of knowledge and you expand on it, I think it becomes even more difficult as an individual to be manipulated by the individuals who, let's say, you've either voted for or not voted for, whatever the case is. But now imagine you multiply that by 500,000 to 1,000,000 to 2,000,000 to 5,000,000. More and more people that understand that history does truly repeat itself, that these aren't just random happen chance things that spawn out of nowhere just because some megalomaniac or something decided he's going to go or she's going to go a different direction and upset a bunch of people. I think it makes people almost impenetrable and understand that they're not going to be had, I guess, by certain regimes. And we're starting to see that, I guess, to an extent in Armenia, but I can't really speak too much upon it because I tend to keep myself a little distant from Armenian politics. The history I love, but the politics is a little tough to get involved with, especially when it's so close to your heart, you know? But in terms of the future, I think that's the key here, is arming yourself with that knowledge. And that some people might look at it in a pessimistic way and say, well, what am I going to do with that? There's a lot you could do with that, because one day, I promise you, it's going to make a difference in your life, some way, somehow. Something's going to happen, and you're going to some chamber in your mind is going to actually explode open, and you're like, wait a minute, hold on, I've seen this before, read about this before.
Mike, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Mike, we can't hear you. Nothing yet. No.
I think you muted your mic.
Okay, yeah, now I got, yeah.
There we go.
We had
Gotcha.
feedback.
We're back.
Okay. I'll just mute everybody else a second so we don't have feedback. I think that in the case here is that we have so much knowledge is so powerful that the more knowledge that we have, whether we act on it or not, we're still going to be better. We'll be a much better society. We can't have a society where you're going against each other, and that's what it seems to appear to be doing now. And that's good. At least my next question. Okay, my next question would be, what do you see for the future? Like for your podcast. This be coming on your 4th season. Tell me a little bit about what do you think the 4th season is going to bring?
I think a lot of the stuff that we dive into, it's a ton. Vic and I have talked about exploring a lot of the key things, even in the past, things that we've already discussed, and revisiting them in greater detail, really painting with a much more detailed brush. I think that's one of the key things moving forward, because there's only so much of the history we could talk about. At some point we're going to get to a point where it's like, okay, now what? Well, it's like, go ahead.
I think, just to add to what you were saying, right now we're kind of going through these chronological order and covering all the kingdoms. While we're doing that, we have guests who join us, and we cover different topics that might have to do with recent history or a certain book that they've written. So we look at those live shows with the guests as a kind of like a side episode, and then we get back to doing our episodes together. We still have so much to cover. I mean, we're in barely getting into the 11th century. So As we keep going forward, like Mike said, when we're talking about these certain kingdoms, that there's these specific characters that come up that we might touch upon, but then later on be like, man, I really would want to know more about this person, what they did. So I think once we go through that, cover all the periods all the way up to modern history, then we'll go back and pick out these specific people and cover their life. Now, when we get closer to the 18th, 19th, 20th century, there are so many amazing people we can cover, from poets to musicians um, to actors to generals. I mean, so much to cover, and so we're not. I think we're not worried that we're going to be out of content, and you can always talk about recent history too. But I think the amount of people we can cover, the amount of subjects we can cover, as long as we can do it, we will. I think we can go into 10 seasons if possible. But the beauty about the podcast is that it's documented, it's right there. So even if one day we decide that, we're not going to continue, or maybe pass the baton to somebody else to carry it, all this stuff is documented. A child that, at that time could be 14, 15 years old, can start listening to us again and rediscover their history. Mike, I think you're muted again.
Okay, two more questions I'd like to ask. Okay, the first one is what do you think we are not learning about the genocide?
Wow. The truth. There's a lot of misinformation about the genocide that is being fed, and I think it's almost these sources that are doing this, they're trying to water it down, like dumb it down almost, that it was just World War One. The Armenians were fighting on the side of the Russians, this and that. No. The genocide started way before the genocide. And that's one thing we're going to cover in tomorrow's episode, which is the Armenian question, which the Armenian question started, if I'm correct from the information I've been given, I believe in the 18th century is when the Armenian question started coming up, and they tried different ways to get rid of us. So again, there's a lot that people don't know why the Armenian genocide took place, what led up to it. We all know 1915, yes, genocide happened, but everything that happens has a backstory that could have taken 100 years to build up to that point. And that's what really happened. And once you understand why this happened, I think people will have a clear idea. But now we're battling again with other, let's call them our enemies for now, by trying to not erase the genocide history. So you're constantly battling here. You're doing all this work, all this information you're trying to put out there, and then you have these other sources that are trying to buy their way into academia and change history the way they want it, and sometimes they're successful because they have money, they're powerful.
To piggyback off of what Vic said, start making content, right? Because we've only got so much that we've made that really never made it too far. But once that influence kind of comes in, and this is where, let's call them they've had the influence of kind of suppressing a lot of the information and not giving out the full truth of what happened. And you know, you can get into all sorts of global politics stuff where it's like, oh, well, you know, the United States does not recognize it. This state recognizes it. This country's province recognizes it. The other province doesn't, so on and so forth. All these little technicalities. But I think as a collective, you have to be smart at fighting this almost endless war of information. Once you start getting the right type of information out there, people will sway their opinions and thoughts. Once you start getting pertinent information out there, just like Vic said, it's not just something that happened on one day. It's something that happened that stemmed back from the 1830s, 1840s, and began to build to its peak sometime around the 1870s, 1880s into World War One. You know, and when people start finding out about that and the atrocities that occurred that started it, or what kind of, you know, the Hamidian massacres and so on and so forth, it really paints a bigger picture and a lot more clearer picture in understanding this, as opposed to it just being some sort of claim. Especially with, not amongst people, but amongst, let's say, if there are any good politicians or council members or anything like that left in this world, I have strong opinions about that, as you could tell, that, you know, when they start understanding that this was a systematic approach over a very lengthy time, once that is fully understood, I think, and better ways to paint pictures of this through, let's say, media, television, film, shows, docuseries, whatever the case is, then I think we're making big progress. You know, I mean, there's a lot of noise being made. Don't get me wrong. It's not like we're quiet. You know that, Mike. You know, but I think moving forward, you need to keep snowballing this. Right, and get a lot more information out there, just more information.
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting. You talk about history, and I have a passion for history myself. But in 1453, when finally Constantinople falls, you know, shortly thereafter, I think the city had gone down to like 50,000 people. So, you know, at one time it was well over 1 million. And then one of the first things that the Mehmet, I think, did was start importing Armenians into becoming artisans and the middle class people in that particular area. So it's very important that we know that this is probably over centuries, not just even 100 years. You know, that this jealousies or whatever that people were started, that people would know that Armenians were imported into the area for a purpose, and when they provide their purpose, then they were tried to be summarily dismissed for being successful, and that's why they wanted them in the first place, which is really bad. Okay. My last question here is, or one thing I want to do is, I really am interested in you tell us a little bit about some of the artwork and stuff that you have available.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of statues that we made, historical characters. One of which was my imagination, I guess, let's call it that. But the others are accurate depictions of historical characters, big historical characters in our history, even up to recent history. But it doesn't end there. We have a lot of things that we're working on, personally speaking, behind the scenes, not just in the form of statues, but also art in different formats, different mediums, working with different people, different artists, and combining their style with our style and so on and so forth, which is kind of like a continuation of what I was just saying about the genocide, right? Is we're putting out more content to spark interest. So in that sense, it's a multi-purpose, I hate to use the term, but agenda, because it's kind of the case. But yeah, there's a lot of really amazing artwork and artists that we're trying to emulate and discuss ideas with. It's not just about us. It's about hopefully building a collective, an army of artists putting stuff out. It's not just about us, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to add to that. That again, the main idea is first, it's these sculptures are a collectible item. They're beautiful, and our first point was, if somebody purchased the sculpture, this beautiful piece, when you place it on your desk or somewhere on a mantle or whatever. The person that might not know about this sculpture, let's say it's Vartan or Tigran or Andranik, so forth, these heroes, they're gonna ask, right? Who is this? And hopefully that person is educated enough to talk about that, which might spark interest for that other person to now go do research and learn more. So they're almost like chess pieces. You place them and spark conversation at the dinner table or at a gathering or something like that. That was our initial goal, and like Mike said, we're welcoming other young artists. We want to tell our stories in new, fascinating ways because I think our stories are beautiful. Our history is beautiful. Some parts are ugly, but you know what? Without ugly, there's no beauty. So. But yeah, that's pretty much our goal, and we'll continue doing this as long as we can. And like I mentioned before, hopefully we'll pass the baton to someone else when we're done with it, and they'll continue doing this.
Okay. Before you're done with this, I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about why it's important to subscribe to your YouTube channel and why you should become a member.
Well, I mean, number one, follow us. If you go to YouTube, search for Med Hedosnej podcast, will come up. Subscribe. Main reason is when we go live, you'll get notified. When we post videos, you get notified. We kind of understand on the YouTube platform, it's a little bit harder for people to always be available to watch or listen. So. Like I said, we're a podcast, so our audio version, which is on all the podcast platforms, doesn't matter what type of device you have. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeart, Amazon Music, anything you can think of. You search for Med Hedosnej will come up. We have a larger audience there because a lot of people who listen to podcasts, most of the time they're driving or they're working in their office. So our audience is. I mean, it's I can't even say tenfold. It's a lot more than what it is on YouTube. But again, whichever way you're comfortable, you can find us, listen to us, subscribe, share with your friends, family, people who might not know about us. Like I said, we're going into 2 years almost, and now we're running into people at church saying, "Oh my God, you guys, that's Vic and Mike," and. It's an awesome feeling. Not that we're celebrities or anything, but it's great that you're seeing people that are listening and they come up to you and say great things, And we just want more and more Armenians to listen to us and share with their non-Armenian friends. Because I can tell you one thing, from all the stats we look at, last year alone we had over 116,000 downloads of our podcast, and we're in 73. We're listened in 73 countries, and 30% of our listeners are non-Armenians. So that says a lot.
And to add to the non-Armenian part, it's our goal is to tell our story and the surrounding stories that tie into our story, not just make it a linear, like I was mentioning earlier, a video game of sorts where it's just about Armenian, but I have a lot of friends who are non-Armenians who listen to us as well, and they love it. They love it. They're learning history. It's a portion of the world history. It's a big jigsaw puzzle, right? So I think that's been our goal, and I think we've done a pretty good job of it. Only still to get better.
Yeah, I think you've done a wonderful job. I'm very impressed. not too many people are doing. I've seen a lot of people are doing Armenian history, but nobody does it like you guys do. So that's I think that's the most important thing.
Thank
I've
you.
seen some things out there which I'm not necessarily agree with, but they do put it out there. But you guys do it the best way. Is there anything you'd like to conclude with today that you'd like to tell people about either history or Armenian history or anything about yourselves before we close?
Just if you're interested, if you're Armenian, you're interested about learning about your history, uh, like I said, follow us, listen to us, reach out to us. You can follow us on Instagram. We respond to every comment that, everybody we get a lot of mail, a lot of messages, and we respond. We love interacting with our listeners, and share it. Like I said, the goal is to also share it with the rest of the world. So if you have non-Armenian friends, family, have them listen to it, and you'll find out how beautiful our history is, and you will learn a lot, which will help you in the future. So that's what I would say.
We make history fun. We do. You know that, Mike. We keep it light. We keep it easy. I think sometimes history can be a heavy topic depending on what you're talking about, and when you keep it light, you keep it interesting, you add as much as you can to it. I think it becomes one of the most fascinating things anybody can educate themselves with. Because this has been a journey for us too. We're learning as we go. So it's the same advice I would give to anybody. Listen to and educate yourselves.
Yeah,
and listen to us if you want to know more about Armenian history,
well,
because we make it fun.
Hey, Mike, I think just listen to you guys if you just want to learn more about history. Forget this idea about Armenians and non-Armenians, because I think, I go back and I told you back in February that, when we write down the word Caucasian, and many of us are Caucasian, we had to come from the Caucasus Mountains, and I happen to know where I came from. That we have a lot more fractional Armenians than you would ever even imagine. It's kind of like what Mike was bringing out. It's how we thought Mesopotamia had to be like near Baghdad, and we find out it's more near Yerevan, or southwest of Yerevan than it is Baghdad to speak of. And our Armenian highlands actually could have been the center point of a lot of things. I think we learned that from you guys, and kudos go to you. You all doing a fantastic job. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I hope that we're going to use some of this podcast we have tonight. We're going to show it to teachers and try to get them ginned up a little bit about Armenian genocide. Not that we're trying to talk more about it, but we're trying to use maps, and we're trying to use other things just to try to get the people generally to understand in one day the importance of Armenian genocide. And then we're having a competition on June the 10th, which is going to be a mock mediation between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and some other different things. And that happens to be the day St. Gregory comes out of the pit. So it's a good feast day as well. It's a Saturday this year. So I appreciate your time. I know you guys are very busy, and I really appreciate all that you've done and all that you continue to do. Thank you so much.